Despite their reputation as the cuddly, stuffed animal of choice for small children, perhaps only rivaled by the squishmallow, bears are not as friendly as their pop culture caricature may suggest. Grizzly bears in particular are a force to be reckoned with. At 400 to 600 pounds, an adult grizzly can reach speeds of up to 35 miles an hour, leaving you no chance of escaping an encounter on foot. And equipped with 4-inch claws, 3-inch canines, and bone-crushing jaw strength, a grizzly that decides to attack is uniquely capable of finishing the job. Black bears, though smaller and less aggressive, come with a fearsome loadout of their own, sporting 2-inch claws and canines just as long. Weighing in around 175 to 400 pounds, depending on the location, an antagonized black bear can easily overpower an unarmed human if they wish. Both grizzlies and black bears are present where I hunt in Idaho. Due to the nature of the pursuit, hunters are more likely to have an encounter with a bear than other groups of recreationalists. At best, it would be thrilling, enjoyable, and could even result in a harvested bear. At worst, it could be deadly. Hey everyone, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Last week we were talking about spring bear hunting, and something that goes hand in hand with bear hunting is safety. When you're in bear country, especially grizz country, you have to have an extra level of awareness that just isn't necessary in areas lacking apex predators. Thankfully, the number of fatal bear attacks on humans every year is extremely low. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to get hit by lightning than be killed by a bear. And though that statistic probably isn't adjusted for hunters, it's highly unlikely you'll be attacked and killed by a bear. That said, it's best to be bear aware and create safe habits when you're out hunting. With the tips and best practices we go over in this podcast, you'll be better prepared to avoid dangerous bear encounters, and you'll sleep a little better each night in that thin nylon tent you call a shelter. I always think it's funny how secure I feel in a thin tent that a bear could rip through in 2 seconds flat. It's such a mental thing. Before we get into it today, if you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to rate it 5 stars on whatever platform you listen on. And if you're feeling generous, send an episode to a friend and leave a review. This will help the podcast grow, and every time you share an episode, you're helping more people get outside and into hunting, which is the entire goal of Persistence Outdoors. So thank you so much for your support. And let's dive in. I want to start with a story about what not to do in bear country. When I was younger, maybe 15 years old, I was in Boy Scouts. And I've talked about this a lot. A lot of my past experience in the outdoors comes from Boy Scouts. So when I was younger, I was in Boy Scouts, and my troop had the opportunity to go to Philmont Scout Ranch. And Philmont is this giant ranch in New Mexico that at some point was gifted to the Boy Scouts. And so Boy Scout troops would go there. They would send maybe a crew of 7 to 10 scouts, and they would go and hike for a week, and they could do different activities along the way. So it was kind of like a backpacking trip and a scout camp combined. It was a lot of fun. At Philmont, they had some pretty strict protocols for avoiding problems with bears. They had black bears on the property. At the time, I was convinced that they were grizzly bears, and I don't know why I thought that, but looking back, they were definitely black bears. And I don't think New Mexico has any grizzly bears that they know of. So we were dealing with black bears, but it was still enough of a risk that they had all of the scouts following their protocols. And some of the protocols were hanging a bear bag, being careful with smellables, and using a bear triangle. So a bear bag, if you're not familiar, is just a bag that you hang up in a tree. You want to hang it up 10 feet high and 4 or 5 feet away from the tree. And you put all your food and smellables in that. And the idea is that it makes it inaccessible for bears, protects your food, and hopefully doesn't encourage them to come back. A bear triangle, or Bermuda Triangle, as they sometimes called it, was a triangle between your bear bag, your fire ring where you would be cooking, and a sump. They had a sump at most of these campsites to help keep a clean camp. And basically all of your cooking and all of your smellables and anything you were going to store overnight that a bear might want to come get into had to stay within your bear triangle. And then you would keep your camp at least 100 yards away from the bear triangle. You'll hear different definitions of a bear triangle. Some people say it's, 100 yards between your camping area, 100 yards between your cooking and eating area, and 100 yards between your bear bag or wherever you're storing your food. But if I remember correctly, at Philmont, it was this triangle created by your bear bag, your fire ring, and your sump. And basically, you just kept all the smellables there so that if a bear did come into camp, they would be interested in that area and not in the scouts in the tents. One thing they really emphasized was that smellables aren't just food. And I think this is a good thing to realize when you're planning a hunt in bear country. Smellables can also be deodorant. I'm not sure that you'd be taking deodorant hunting, but it's an example. Some people even say batteries are smellables. You might think of different bug sprays. You might think of your boots. If you've greased your boots up, those could be smellables too. So there's a whole lot of things that could be smellable. And even if a bear doesn't want to come eat it, they might be interested and they might come in to see what it's about. So there's food, and then there's all these other categories of things that could be particularly interesting to a bear. One story they told at Philmont was the story of the boys who got in a deodorant fight with Axe deodorant spray, and they used it in their tents. They were spraying at each other, and then a bear came and ate both of the boys and just completely demolished them. And I'm sure that's not a true story, but it is funny to think about. And they used it quite often to drive their point home about smellables. So one night we were getting into camp a little late, and we had eaten on the trail a ways back because we were worried about having enough water. So I think we ate near a water source, and then getting up to this camp, we had to carry some extra water. But we had already eaten and we didn't need to do any cooking, and it was starting to get dark. And as we get up there, we see some signs that basically say recent predator activity. And I can't remember if it was just bears or just mountain lions or both, but we see these signs and it's getting dark and we're in these tall pine trees, and it's just a little bit eerie. We're not in a dangerous situation per se, but we know that all the things that we've been training to do throughout the trip and all the precautions we take are actually necessary for sure in this area. So it went from being a little bit light to everybody thinking, okay, if I need to leave camp for any reason, I should bring a buddy. You're kind of looking up in the trees as you're trying to poop in the woods. It's kind of funny. But that night, one of the scouts was feeling pretty tired, and I think he may have been a little bit sick or a little bit uncomfortable, and he was just ready to go to bed. So right as we got into camp, we had set up a little cooking tarp, which was just a tarp that you could cook under. And then in the evenings, we would put all our packs under there so they would stay dry. And we would take all our smellables out of our packs and put them in a bear bag near that area. And this scout who was feeling super tired, he just got under the cooking tarp and fell asleep. And everybody else was focusing on what they were doing. And so they were setting up tents and getting into their tents about maybe 100 yards away. I can't remember how far away, but getting into tents, and it was dark. So once you got your tent up, you just get in and go to sleep. Well, either the leaders on the trip didn't realize, or we realized and we just didn't care. But this scout hadn't set up his tent, and he was just sleeping under the cooking tarp. And everybody was so exhausted from that day that we all climbed in our tents and went to bed. And that night we slept with a scout as a human sacrifice in the Bermuda Triangle, completely out of it, while we were all sleeping a ways away. And if a bear had come into camp, most likely he would have gone straight to that bear triangle where we had our smellables and our packs, and where we would have cooked. We had our cooking tent there that smelled like food. And most likely he would have gone right there and possibly had a conflict with a sleeping, groggy scout. Thankfully, that didn't happen, but it's just a little ironic that of all places, that's where he decided to crash, and somehow we let him do it. And I'm sure the rest of us slept a little bit better knowing that we had given our sacrifice. When I think about bear safety, the first thing that usually comes to mind is, should I bring bear spray or a handgun? But in reality, your self-defense tools are not the best way to deal with bears. Instead, you really need to think about avoiding conflict in the first place. So we'll get to bear spray and handguns, but first let's talk about some ways you can avoid conflict. One of the best ways to avoid conflict with bears is to hunt in a larger group. The more people you have in your group, the less likely you are going to be attacked. 2 people is better than 1. 3 people is better than 2. And there's a couple reasons for this. 1, if the bear sees 4 people all together, you look a lot larger. There's a lot more for the bear to keep track of, and they're going to feel less confident rushing in and harming you. Another thing is, and this isn't great for hunters, but another thing is, with a larger group size, you're more likely to be detected by a bear sooner and less likely to surprise the bear. And then finally, when you have just more people, you have more eyes looking out, and there really is safety in numbers. If you're in a situation where stealth isn't important, maybe you've already killed the animal you're hunting and you don't need to be sneaky anymore, you should make some noise and try to do your best to make bears aware of your presence from a distance away. You can do this by talking loudly, maybe singing a song, just generally making a ruckus so that a bear is never surprised and exhibits a defensive, surprised response. You can also use the wind. If you're approaching a kill site, it's best to approach from upwind so that your scent will waft over the kill site and the bear will know of your presence well before you arrive. Once a bear is aware of your presence, if it hasn't been habituated to humans, there's a good likelihood that it will leave. And if it's not sitting on your kill or not sitting on food or something, there's good likelihood that it doesn't want a confrontation and it will leave, especially black bears. Grizzly bears can be a little bit more cantankerous. A lot of conflict between bears and humans will be over that food. So storing your food in a way that doesn't reward bears for coming into your camp and getting food is an important thing to do. One way to store food is to hang a bear bag. Hanging a bear bag can be a little bit tricky, so let me give you a few tips. My first tip is hang a bear bag while it's still light outside if you can. It's a lot harder to find a suitable tree in the dark, so if you know where your camp is going to be, hang a bear bag before it gets dark. The next tip is to use enough rope. You are going to need a lot of rope to be able to get the rope up high enough, and then it's going to double over on itself, right? Because you're throwing the rope over a branch. So you need to make sure you just have enough cordage on hand. It's much more frustrating when you don't have enough rope than when you have a little bit too much rope. When you're tossing your rope up into the tree, you're going to need to tie it to something a little bit heavier or something that you can actually throw. So sometimes I tie it to a stick or a rock. I've even used a Nalgene water bottle. And you're going to huck that object up into the tree and over a branch. And then when it comes back down, you're going to untie that. You want to make sure after you throw that up into the tree that it doesn't swing back and hit you. So you need to be watching where it goes. One thing that's hard with bear bags is finding a tree that has a suitable branch where you can get your bear bag 10 feet up and 4 feet out from the tree. So I would recommend that you look up some techniques for using 2 trees instead of just 1. I found good success with this. Basically, you're going to throw a rope over a branch in one tree, and then another tree at least 10 feet away, you're going to do the same thing. And then you're going to take the loose ends and meet those in the middle, and you can tie them to a carabiner or tie them to your bear bag. And then you'll take the free ends, I guess they're both loose ends at some point, but you'll take the ends not tied to each other or to the bear bag and tighten both of those. And so the bear bag will go up into the air suspended in between the 2 trees. That's a really good method when you don't have suitable trees around. It requires more cordage, but it is one of the best ways to get your bear bag up there to that recommended height and distance from the trunk of a tree. And then practice hanging a bear bag while you've got some time to mess with it. Preferably before you're out camping and you need to hang up a bear bag, go to the national forest, get out in your backyard and try hanging a bear bag a couple times and see what you actually need to do to get it 10 feet up and 4 feet out. And you can see how much cordage you need, what sort of weight works best for getting your rope up into a tree. And having practiced that beforehand will make it a lot easier when you're actually out in the field and you want to go to bed. And the last thing you need to do is hang this bear bag for safety. Another option for storing food is to lock it in a car or a hard-sided container. If you put your food in your car, it's a lot less likely that a bear will get to it. Sometimes they may be determined and try to get to it anyway, and that can damage your car. But it's a lot more likely that they're just not going to be able to access that. And it's the same with a hard-sided container. There's some coolers out there that are bear-proof, and probably the cooler will get damaged, but at least the bear won't get that reward of getting food from a human campsite, which is in some ways more important that they don't get that reward than protecting your food, because you can get more food, maybe not if you're in the backcountry, right? But likely you can get more food, whereas habituating that bear is what makes it become a danger to you and other people. So just locking it up in something that's hard-sided, Some campsites will have bear lockers that you can put food in. Probably aren't going to run into those as much hunting, but if you've got a big cooler or your vehicle, those can be good options. And finally, bear cans. Bear cans are much more common with backpackers, but they could be a possibility for you. A bear can is just a little hard-sided container that is very hard for a bear to open up. And you put your food in there and you store those away from camp on the ground. These would be an option if you don't have any trees or don't have good trees for hanging a bear bag. Some areas even require them. Again, not as likely when you're hunting, but they could be an option for hunters. I remember using them on the Olympic Peninsula, and I thought they were going to be a real pain. But honestly, once you found a way to strap them to your pack, they weren't that bad, and you could just keep your food in there. So they are an option, something to look into, and in a lot of ways, it's much more convenient than a bear bag because you don't have to rig it up. You also need to think about how you treat the meat and carcass of an animal that you've killed. So there's a few best practices for this. The first is to separate the gut pile from the meat. Often that gut pile is going to be super stinky and it's going to have some organs that animals like to eat first. So if you can separate that from all the muscle meat and things that you're taking, it can buy you some time and encourage the animals to go to that first instead of to you. If you need to leave the meat in the field while you make a trip out with the first load and then you're going to come back to it, it's best to hang it just like a bear bag, and it's best to hang it in an open area if possible. This will allow you, when you're coming back to the meat, to see the area and verify that there are no bears sitting on the carcass, which could be a danger to you. So this could be hard to do. There may not always be trees in an open area, but you just want to think about a place that you can put the meat that preferably you can use your binoculars to glass as you're approaching it and have that visual confirmation that there are no bears. When you're approaching your meat, say you've taken out a load and you're coming back for another load the next day, you need to be careful that there's no bears there that have claimed the carcass, and you should approach from the upwind side. So bears have a great sense of smell, right? And if you go upwind of them, they are going to be aware of your presence. And hopefully the bear will just run off if it is on the carcass, or at least it will be aware of you, and hopefully it won't make a defensive charge out of surprise. Anything you can do to alert the bear of your presence, like making noise, traveling upwind, is likely a good thing and will help you avoid confrontation. If there's no suitable places to hang the meat and you have to leave the meat on or near the ground, it may be helpful to leave a couple articles of clothing near the meat and even pee on the ground around the area where the meat is. Leaving your scent and leaving your clothing there can deter a bear from coming and eating it. And they generally want to avoid confrontation. So you may have success by basically marking your territory, and hopefully the bears will then leave the meat alone. One more way to avoid conflict with bears that sort of bleeds into protection is to use a bear wire or an electrical fence for bears. There are portable electrical fences that you can use for camping and backpacking. I saw one that was even 2.5 pounds and it was under $300. So it's pricey, but if you're in an area with lots of grizzly bears, it may be worth it. And at 2.5 pounds, it's really not that much extra weight, even for a backpacking trip. All you do with a portable electrical fence is string it up around where you're sleeping, and it provides enough discomfort and enough of a shock to bears that it's likely to deter them. And when you're not sleeping, you can just turn it off so that you're not in danger of shocking yourself. An electrical fence is definitely a specialized piece of kit, but again, depending on the real risk of bears in your area, it may be worth it. So all of those are methods and systems for preventing encounters and confrontations with a bear. But what if a confrontation is inevitable? If you're face to face with a bear, you want to take a firm but non-threatening approach. So you want to avoid eye contact. If you're in a group, you want to group together to make yourself look bigger. You want to speak in a loud, firm voice. You don't want to scream because that could be interpreted as a prey noise. You want to get your gun or bear spray and you want to back away slowly if possible. You're trying not to provoke the bear, but you also don't want to be an easy target. So you need to stand your ground and you never want to run because you could trigger its predatory instincts and you're not going to outrun a bear. There's sort of two main categories of bear attacks. Most attacks will fall into one of these two categories. And those are defensive aggressive attacks and predatory attacks. Grizzlies often, when they are surprised, will go into a defensive aggressive mode where they will charge in to neutralize the threat. So if you're hiking along and you surprise a grizzly, they may come at you just to neutralize the threat. It's not that they see you as prey and want to eat you. They just see that you've invaded their space and they want to come in and end the fight before it begins, essentially. Now, if you haven't surprised the bear and it's kind of facing off with you, some of the signs that you can see that tell you it's feeling defensive are that it may pop their teeth at you, they're snapping their jaws at you, they may make some huffing noises, and they may swat the ground, and they're kind of trying to deter you from coming any closer. At this point, it's a volatile situation and they could charge. There's two types of charges. One is a bluff charge. When a bear is bluff charging, it will likely have its head up and forward and its ears up. And it's running in to scare you, but it may not actually make contact with you. It may peel off before it hits you. On the other hand, there's the I'm gonna kill you charge. And the bear will have its head down and its ears pointed back. You can kind of think about seeing a dog at a dog park. And if you think of seeing a dog run across a field to come check you out or check out your dog, they're often running in sort of a curious manner and they have their head up and their ears up, but it doesn't look like they're coming in to do real harm. But then if you've seen a dog attack something or chase something it actually wants to kill, it has a different demeanor. Its ears are down, it's low to the ground, and its teeth are going to be snapping, right? Bears are going to be the same way. Now, I haven't been charged by a bear, so I can't tell you that I've been able to distinguish the difference between a bluff charge and a real charge in my own experience. And I wouldn't blame anybody if they had a hard time distinguishing between the two in the heat of the moment. But if you see a bear coming from a long way away and you have the time and you kind of notice these different body languages and postures, you may then choose to respond differently. It may be the difference between you grabbing your bear spray and you grabbing your gun, right? So it's helpful to know and helpful to be aware of. And if you have the time and you think you can distinguish, it may help you in that tense situation. In a predatory attack, the bear isn't going to be exhibiting signs of distress. So it's not going to be popping its teeth or huffing or swatting the ground. Instead, it's going to act like a predator and it's going to look focused. It may be locked in on you. It may be stalking you. It may be following at a distance or circling. And in this case, situational awareness is your best friend. Hopefully, you're aware of the bear long before it's right up on you. Now, predatory bear attacks are less common. They make up something like 15% of bear attacks as a whole. And often it's thought that black bears, if they attack, are more likely to be predatory than grizzly bears, because grizzly bears have that stress response to go and neutralize the threat, but black bears generally do not, unless maybe it's a female black bear, a sow, protecting its cubs. So if you're attacked by a black bear, there's a chance that it's a predatory attack, and that means that you need to respond differently. This is where you get the rule of thumb for how to respond to a grizzly bear attack versus how to respond to a black bear attack. So when a grizzly bear attacks, the rule of thumb is to play dead and not to fight back. And that's because the thinking is, if the grizzly bear attacks you, it is likely not predatory, you likely surprised it, and it's coming in to neutralize the threat. And if it sees you not moving, not being a threat anymore, it's more likely to break off the attack and go somewhere else. Will you be injured in the process? Yes, probably. But it's better than being killed in the process. With a black bear, the assumption is that the black bear is attacking in a predatory manner. And so with black bears, the advice is to always fight back with anything you've got. Even if you don't have a weapon, fight back. Because theoretically, a black bear attacking you is a predator and wants to kill you, and you need to do anything you can to prevent that from happening. If you are in a situation where you are attacked by a grizzly bear in that defensive, aggressive manner, and you need to play dead, it's a good idea to cover your head and neck with your hands and with your arms. If you can, lay on your stomach to protect all the soft parts of your stomach. And if you have your pack on, don't take that pack off when you encounter a bear. Keep that on because that could protect you from the bear's claws and the bear's mouth. And then finally, for what it's worth, if you're able to determine that this attack is not going to break off, this attack is in fact predatory, at that point you have to fight back because you don't have any other option. One final thing that will help in this muddy sort of gray area of what to do when you are confronted or even attacked is to be able to identify a grizzly versus a black bear. And the most recognizable difference is that a grizzly has a big hump in between its shoulders and a black bear does not. A grizzly will also have sort of a dished facial profile. And what they mean by that is it looks kind of concave between its muzzle and its forehead, whereas a black bear will have a much more straight transition from its forehead to its muzzle, or even something of a Roman nose. Grizzly bears will often be larger and they will have fur that looks grizzled, which just means it's lighter at the tips and it looks a little bit more textured than a black bear. Black bears will often be black, but not always. And grizzlies will have longer claws than black bears if you're looking at their tracks. I think the best way to start being able to distinguish between black bears and grizzlies is to just look at a lot of pictures of them. One resource that may be helpful for you, I will link to in the show notes. It's the Idaho Bear Identification Test, and it goes through some distinguishing factors between grizzlies and black bears. And then it has some examples and a test that you can take to be able to figure out if you've really got it. And after a while, you just start to get a sense of what a grizzly bear looks like in comparison to a black bear. it becomes pretty intuitive at some point, but it's also helpful to know those specifics so you can distinguish between the two in a place where both exist and it might be questionable. All right, so now you know a little bit about what's going on when a bear actually charges or attacks, and maybe how you should respond. Let's talk about the tools for self-defense. This is going to be traditionally bear spray or a handgun. Now, if you have a rifle on hand, by all means use that. Or if you have a shotgun with slugs, by all means use that. That's going to be a much better tool than a handgun for sure. But when we think about sort of the tools that we can keep on us all the time when we're backpacking or hunting, it usually comes down to bear spray and handguns. So what are the pros and cons of each? Which one should you choose? The first thing to look at is which one is more effective. There are studies out there that say bear spray is more effective, and it says bear spray is effective to stop the undesirable behavior something like 90% of the time, and handguns are only effective something like 80% of the time. And so you could look at that and say, well, obviously I should use bear spray then. But in a lot of these studies, the data is actually kind of skewed because it's talking about stopping the undesirable behavior. So that could mean trying to get a bear away from a trash heap. It doesn't necessarily mean that the bear was charging in an aggressive manner. And from what I've seen, the studies don't actually really compare apples to apples well enough to base your decision only off these effectiveness studies. And it's a hard thing to study because every situation is going to be different. Just because someone had a gun on them doesn't mean that they had it accessible. There may have been issues with deploying the bear spray, right? So it is hard to find a useful data set for all of those. So I think it's more helpful to compare the advantages and disadvantages of bear spray and handguns. So some of the advantages of bear spray are that bear spray is relatively easy to use. You can tell someone how to use bear spray and likely they will be able to deploy it. Compared to handguns, it's an affordable option. Bear spray does expire every 3 to 4 years, but $40 every 3 to 4 years is a lot less expensive than $500 to $1,000 for a handgun and then the cost of ammo. So it is a lot more affordable. It tends to be lightweight compared to a handgun. It's non-lethal and it creates a big cloud when you deploy it. So all of those are good things. You want that lightweight because it's less pain in the mountains carrying it around. It's great that it's non-lethal because then you're not killing the bear, and that may be undesirable in many situations. And that big cloud gives you a greater area compared to a single bullet to actually deter that bear. Now, some of the issues are that a lot of people don't actually practice with bear spray. I can tell you that I have bear spray and I've never once shot it. And that could actually be an issue because since they're single use, people don't want to practice with them. Or in my experience, that's why I don't want to practice with it. But I also don't know exactly how it's going to deploy. So you have this issue where people are carrying bear spray, but they may not actually be proficient with it the way that they think they are. You can also have wind. And if you surprise a bear because you are downwind of the bear, and it comes charging at you, and you try to deploy your bear spray into the wind, well, it's going to blow back at you. And hopefully it works to deter the bear, but it could also get all over you and really cause some issues in that way as well. And then another disadvantage, which is also an advantage, is that it doesn't cause lasting injury to the bear. And this is just a disadvantage or an advantage depending on the situation, right? If the bear is intent on doing you harm and shakes off the bear spray, well, now there's nothing you can do. If you shoot it with a gun, at least you're putting some holes in it and maybe it will start to bleed out. But with bear spray, you're in trouble. One note I want to make about bear spray is that you should be cautious with the spray. You almost want to treat it like a weapon, because if it deploys in your face or accidentally or in your car or it heats up and blows up somewhere, it's going to be a bad day. It's not going to be comfortable and you're not going to like it. So be careful with your bear spray. I like to keep my bear spray when I'm not using it in a Ziploc bag, just in case it were to leak or blow up. And then when I have it with me when I'm hiking around, I'm just careful that I'm not laying on it if I'm getting down on the ground to make a shot, or bumping it or having it in a place where I could accidentally deploy it. There are bad stories out there of people spraying themselves with bear spray at critical moments in the hunt. Okay, let's talk about handguns. So some of the advantages of handguns, like we talked about, are that they can be lethal. If you actually hit a bear with a handgun, you are likely to do it some damage, and that may help to end the fight. Also with a handgun is you're probably a little bit more likely to practice because you can shoot the handgun over and over again. Now that's about where the advantages end. Handguns can be very hard to shoot, especially for someone who isn't trained. So if you get a handgun and you don't practice, you may be worse off than getting bear spray and not practicing. And also handguns can be pretty heavy. You're carrying all that ammo, you're carrying a hunk of metal strapped to your body. And so that can be a little bit discouraging. And if it's so heavy, you may not even bring it with you to the places where you need that protection. So you do need to consider the weight penalty when you're hiking around in the mountains. There's all sorts of different types of handguns that would work. One common debate is semi-automatic versus revolvers. A lot of people like the ammo capacity of a semi-automatic gun. Others like the simplicity and reliability of a revolver. If you think about it, if you're charged by a bear, it's unlikely that you're going to get many shots off in the time that a bear takes to cover the distance from where it is to you. Even if it was 100 yards away, it could cover that distance in a very short amount of time. So a lot of people argue that you don't need the ammo capacity of a semi-automatic gun, and they would rather go with a revolver with large caliber loads. Really, it's up to you. I think, though, that you should choose something that you have actually practiced with. And for me, where I've landed is the only handgun that I practice with is a 9mm handgun that I use for everyday carry. And since I'm familiar with that gun and I actually practice with it, that's the one that I'm going to carry for bear defense. If I had a revolver and I had time and money to practice with it, maybe I would use that. But putting bullets on target is more important than the exact caliber or exact load you're using, or even the type of gun that you're carrying. And it doesn't matter what you're carrying if you can't hit your target. So I would recommend that whatever you carry, it's something that you've practiced with and are proficient with. There's lots of different schools of thought of what type of ammo to use. I'm personally of the opinion that for grizzly bears, you should load your gun with something that will penetrate deeply, because with a grizzly bear, you could have 12 inches of muscle and bone that you need to punch through to even get to the vitals. Or you could be shooting at that sloped forehead and you want something that will punch right through that skull. So personally, I think something like a hard cast lead bullet or a copper bullet is a good idea. You can get hard cast lead bullets that have a flat nose that are made to penetrate in a straight line. And the idea is that they're just going to keep going forward and poke small but long holes in that animal. You can also get copper bullets that have kind of a screwdriver shape on the end of them. You might look up G9 Defense. It's a place in Idaho that makes these. And these bullets can also do very good at penetrating, but also create a flesh wound similar to that of a hollow point. So if I were going to change up what I carried, I would probably go for something like a screwdriver shaped copper bullet in my gun. But just something that can actually penetrate through to the vitals on a grizzly bear, that's what you want. And that's often going to be different than what you would carry for self-defense against humans. I've been carrying a handgun for protection against bears, and I think it is a good idea. But the more I think about both options, the more I'm moving towards carrying both. And while I don't like the weight penalty of that, I think both bear spray and handguns are useful in different situations. One thing that I think about a lot is, what if I am out hunting and I'm confronted by a female black bear, a sow that has cubs, and I don't want to shoot the sow, right? But it's being aggressive because it has the cubs and it's trying to protect them. Well, then in that situation, hopefully I could have bear spray on me and non-lethally deter that bear. But on the other hand, let's say I've sprayed bear spray at a charging bear and it doesn't stop and it knocks me over and is on top of me. Well, at that point, I'm really going to want to have a gun that I can shoot up at the bear with. And so I think there's different situations where you might use one or the other, and it could be nice to be able to escalate appropriately without just having to shoot any threatening bear. Whatever you decide to use, you need to make sure that it's always on you and it's always accessible. Your bear spray is not going to be helpful if you attached it to the hip belt of your backpack and then you put your backpack down, right? Now it's not accessible anymore. So you need to think about options for carrying your bear spray or handgun that can always be on you. So this might be a chest holster. This might be a hip holster. I have a gun belt that's basically a piece of webbing, and I kind of sling it low like an old cowboy gun belt and carry my handgun at 3 o'clock. And that works to carry underneath the hip belt of my backpack. But when I take my backpack off, I still have that gun on me. So that's something you might look into. It's just a way to always have your gun on you. If you have your gun or bear spray attached to your pack, you need to think of a way that you can then take it off of your pack anytime you put your pack down. There are modular holsters that have little attachment points that you can put on your backpack and then also on a belt on your hip. Whatever it is, you just need to think through it beforehand so that you can always actually be carrying your defensive tool. One last thing I'll say about handguns is you may consider getting some sort of night sight or red dot for your handgun. I've had lots of experiences where I'm walking back to my truck in the dark and I've pulled out my handgun and looked at my just factory Glock sights and realized I'm not going to be able to see my sights if a bear's charging at me. Especially with a headlamp on, it gets all reflective and weird where I might be able to see my sights but not the bear. If I turn my headlamp off, I can't see my sights at all. Maybe I won't be able to see the bear either, right? But you may want to think about having some sort of night sights or electronic sight to help you in those low light situations. All right, everyone. I hope this information has been helpful for you. Bear attacks are rare and most likely you're going to hunt and camp and be just fine. But as hunters, we do have a higher risk of encountering bears, so it's best to be prepared. A few things come to mind as I wrap this up. First of all, you've got to have a plan. Do some research, figure out what kind of bears you're dealing with, and then make sure to practice with whatever deterrent and self-defense methods you intend to use. If you've never hung a bear bag, go try it before your trip. Make sure to get some reps in with your handgun or unholstering your bear spray. Set up your electric fence. Whatever it is, you want to get the kinks out before you're spending significant time with the bears. In a hunting context, you'll also want to think about how you're going to deal with a dead animal and meat. We talked about this a little bit already, but there's lots of questions to think about, like, will one person break the animal down while the other person stands watch? Are there other people you can call in to help make the process faster and more safe? And then what are you going to do once you get the meat to your camp? These are all questions you want to be asking before you're arguing with a big grizz. The second thing that comes to mind is that you actually have to implement your plan when you're out there. I think about it in terms of should. Sometimes I think about something and I think, oh, I should probably do this, or I should probably do that. But depending on what it is, I may let it slide. Now, that's not a great habit, right? And sometimes I experience the consequences. But it's even more important to act on your should thoughts in bear country. Maybe it's been a long day, you just ate, it's getting dark, and you want to go to bed. But there's that thought in the back of your head that you should put up a bear bag, or at least get your food and smellables out of camp. It's going to feel like a pain, but in bear country, especially in grizzly bear country, you're going to need to take some extra precautions to stay safe. So maybe these will be issues for you, maybe they won't, but I think having a plan and then acting on it consistently every time are good things to keep in mind. With that, I think I'll wrap this up. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll catch you on the next one.